Welcome to 2019. It sure is good to be back here. I hope you had a nice Christmas with your friends and families and had a good New Year's. Hopefully we'll have a good year ahead. And we begin with a look at the Savage Axis. I lost track of the number of people that told me how wonderful the Savage Axis is. It took me a while to get one. I've had actually more than one, but then as usual I buy one and then I take it to the range and then I sell it. So I got a hold of one in 30-06 for the channel, and definitely learned a lot for this video. Be a little bit tricky for the camera people, but here we go. In front of me I took them all apart so that you can actually see what's what with these rifles. This is a Remington 783, and the reason that I put the 783 here is so that you can see how similar rifles have become. I also had requests to take a look at the Mossberg Patriot and the Ruger American, the Marlin products. Anyway, all of these rifles that come with polymer stocks. So this is the Remington 783. This is the Savage Axis that you all wanted to see. And this is a Savage 110. Now I've been trying to date this, and I actually rely on viewers to get the correct manufacturer date. There seems to be some confusion about this particular rifle, and it was either made in the 60s or 70s, and in a way it doesn't matter because I wanted it here for comparative purposes. Maybe it's probably useful to start with the receivers, so you can see that here's the 110 original barrel nut, and I actually just looked that up to make sure that that's the right word to use. It's attached with a spanner wrench, or tightened with a spanner wrench, and this is how you set headspace. This was a big deal back in whatever it was, I think 1958. A gentleman by the name of Nicholas Brewer, from memory, invented and then in 1963 patented this action, which the intention was originally to make a very affordable bolt action rifle, and Savage succeeded. By the way, this rifle, which is very similar to the Axis, is the longest in production bolt action in, I believe, the world, but definitely in the United States and North America. So you can see we have a steel receiver, and I'll draw to your attention that the safety is back here on the rear of the receiver. That's not a bad place for it. And then if we go to the Axis, we can see it's here as well, and it's very convenient. Now, they did a clever thing with the Axis. You can see the safety is in the same position, but the action actually ends here, and the safety is actually plastic. This is a polymer, and it's perched on the trigger assembly. So you know how it is in any kind of production. They're trying to cut costs all the time. So I guess this change in the length of the receiver was worth doing. But on the original 110 back here, you can see that the receiver extends backwards, and then the trigger is actually on the receiver, and then the trigger is assembly is hung underneath that. We'll talk a little bit more about the bolts. That this obviously is the bolt recess for the original 110. This rifle, by the way, in taking it apart, you find out just how fine this rifle is. This is a beautifully made rifle. That's the trigger guard from the 110. That's the floor plate assembly. It's not a releasing floor plate, but it's still sheet metal. There's a reinforcing plate under this floor plate which you can't see. Follower, magazine spring, and then 3 screws, and the trigger guard is aluminum. And I may as well jump to the modern, the Axis, which is a 110. When I took these apart, you can see that it's really a Savage 110, except this was made in, let's say, 68 or 73, and this was made in 2018. And here we have, instead of a trigger guard. We have kind of a trigger guard, lower stock polymer something, reasonably well made, and it serves its purpose, protects the trigger. This is the magazine for the Axis, and this is the magazine for the 783. And I only put these components here for comparative purposes. Like I said, this is the trigger guard for the 783, and they may have improved the shape of the 783. And then here's the original Savage 110 bolt. You can see the floating bolt head, which has a lot to do with the accuracy. And you can see the pin in the front here. This pin is what holds that bolt head on. That was quite a clever development. Actually, everything about the 110 is quite clever. And I can pretend that I'm somehow familiar with gun design. And then here's the bolt for the Axis. So you can see the heritage, the location of the bolt handle. Clearly, when I took it apart, I could see different manufacturing techniques, and there are all kinds of tricks that they can use to make parts, not just investment castings, which we can talk about another time, but there are other ways, using powdered steel and sintering and so forth. But here's the Axis bolt. You can see the same pin. The lugs are slightly different. I'll put them side to side here, but you can see the heritage. The Axis is a 110. It's just been changed to make manufacturing still simpler, still cheaper. The bolt faces we can look at just quickly. It's hard to focus on all this stuff, but anyway. So this is the original 110, and here's the Axis. So that probably covers the bolts, and we've looked at the magazine. Of course, this is the Axis magazine, and the original 110 had a floor plate, much as you'd see in a Remington 780L. Then we start seeing some changes. The original 110 had this open architecture for the receiver. I'm a big fan of open architecture. It's true, if we used computers and gauges, we could measure that this is slightly less rigid, this action, because it's not closed. But this is a hunting rifle. This isn't a target rifle, even though a lot of the Savages shoot like target rifles. The open architecture, I think, is better in case you have a problem in the magazine or in the chamber, or you can get out at your rifle. Here we have this closed architecture on the Axis. I'm not pointing this out as a fault. I'm just saying this is a characteristic of the action, and I have no idea what motivated Savage to close it up like this. They all are doing this, and we can draw the camera here to the 783. This is closed, and as I said, I bought all these rifles for the channel, and I mean, you have to focus to make sure that you're not getting things confused. Here's the 783 barrel nut, and then swinging the camera back to the Axis, here's the barrel nut, and then over to the 110 decades earlier, here's the barrel nut. I mean, obviously something's going on. In the 783, they still have the receiver ending back here on the top of the tang, which from traditional gun making point of view is probably the way to go. Some people wrote me, how do you take these barrel nuts off? I have not done that, but you need something like this. It's not this wrench, but it's just something like this wrench. This is a spanner wrench. This is actually for choke tubes, but they just hook into these grooves, and then you can take the barrel nuts off. All the reports for the Axis are about the same as for the 110. This is an exceptionally accurate rifle, and no one knows, when you get right down to it, after you produce a barrel that has excellent tolerances and your trigger is sound, as this is, and the 110 and the 783, all fine triggers. The tolerances for the bolt are all within industry standards or exceed industry standards. So then why do some rifles get a reputation for exceptional accuracy? Well, I guess it's some of these intangibles like barrel harmonics and just how the whole rifle when it's assembled, handles bullets, and there are a whole range of principles of physics that are subject to interpretation. Anyway, this is the 110, this is the Axis, and this is the 783. By the way, I wanted to mention something to you. If you notice, if you're watching the whole video, while you're an exception, most people watch just a few minutes. So I try to repeat myself on the advice of producers at different points in the video, because what happens is people write me and they actually say I forgot something because they happen to fast forward during the section where I said what it was that they thought I didn't say. That's not a big deal. I like hearing from everybody. But I thought what I do is scatter the same thoughts throughout the video. Then, I mean, it's a matter of probability whether you run into the things that I'm saying. But that's why I repeat myself sometimes. And then, now we jump ahead to what really makes a rifle have, I think, significant character other than the action. And that's the stock. And here's the stock for the Axis. I could probably rebed the original 110 in this stock. It would take some work because I hope the camera can pan down here. This is the recoil lug on the original 110. This is the proper way to do a recoil lug. I mean, ideally you would do it the Mauser way and the recoil lug would be part of the action. In this case it's clamped between this head spacing lug, or the barrel nut as they call it, and the action. But anyway, this works. And then they all switched, and the Tikka T3 maybe really popularized this to this system where there is no recoil lug on the action. It's kind of part of the stock. And in here it's an aluminum wafer in the Axis stock. And you can see here that there is no recoil lug on the Axis action. So if, for example, you remove this piece, this wafer, hope I'm pointing at it, if you remove this from the stock, I don't know whether you can, I won't bother trying, but if you got it out of there somehow and dropped this into this stock, there'll be nothing to support this action except, I guess, the trigger back here. So it'll just slam and break its way through these surfaces. And that's why you have recoil lugs. And this is the best system. And this is the best receiver of the three. This was properly made. It's machined steel. And when you work this action, it may not be as slick as the Axis actually, because the Axis bolt is suspended on the bolt head. There's a kind of a priority out there these days to have a super slick bolt operation, and so they offer the consumer that, but the bolt is kind of hanging in the air. That's not a deficiency, I'm just telling you kind of the way it is. So this is the best receiver by far. It doesn't have a removable magazine, but I don't know, maybe I'm old-fashioned. I never need all that many magazines when I'm hunting or even when I'm target shooting. Those magazines are constantly just falling out, and then you want a second one and then a third one, and then there are magazines all over the place. And there's something to be said for what people knew 100 years ago. But anyway, don't want to be lecturing too much. So this is the Axis stock. I didn't twist it before. Yeah, this has got a lot of twist to it. I told you I buy used rifles for the channel. It's because in the end you end up with 100 rifles that you're reviewing. Something happened here and the stock started melting, and the guy that sold it to me never told me that, but that's fine. It's not a big deal. You could sand this and maybe put some kind of Rust-Oleum paint on it. But I mean, in the end, this is, they say it's stable. It probably does whatever a gun stock needs to do. But I don't know. I think these are characterless stocks, but that's just me. And then we have this beautiful stock on the original Savage 110. And apparently this one is particularly special, but it's not a custom stock. This is just a Savage 110 from 1960 or 70 something. Beautifully made, properly fitted. It's been used a lot, but it has character. It holds the barrel. And the barrel has some features I hope I can remember. I mean, in the first place, the original 110 had iron sights. The 783 has no iron sights, and neither does the Axis. And I guess that means you're supposed to put a scope on, obviously. But as I've written a few times, I think people would be surprised at how easy it is to hit with iron sights. Iron sights are perfectly acceptable. They have been for a long, long time, especially for daylight hunting. And they remove that complexity that you've got the scope, you've got a sight in the scope, then you've got to aim through the scope, then is the scope still on, are the mounts tight, and the rifle becomes clunky and you've got this thing hanging on the top, or you just pick up your rifle. That's why I think a lot of people like Winchester Model 94s and a lot of other rifles that are iron sights, you just grab the rifle like you would a shotgun, and generally speaking you don't miss. In fact, scopes have a way of magnifying tremor, and in the excitement of the hunt, you just miss. With iron sights, I'm just saying, you usually hit. That's the 110. Beautiful walnut stock, well made, nicely checkered. It's lovely to own, and the gun doesn't disappear into an ocean of black in your vault if you own 5 or 6 guns. And then here's the 783. The 783 does have a recoil lug, and you can see it does because there's no recoil lug buried in the plastic here. And this stock does twist around quite a bit. And I haven't tested these for heat. I have no idea. Wood stocks burn too, or even better. But hopefully fires don't happen too often. So altogether, I have no doubt that you all know more than I do about this Axis. I can only take these guns apart and share with you what I know about guns. Hopefully that's not nothing. And they've definitely simplified manufacture. I'm not sure there are many more places to go to cut costs. I've been told they're going to get rid of the middle section of the bolt body on some sporters. So that means this section from here to here doesn't necessarily have to be steel, because all this has to do is turn this bolt head. It has to turn these lugs. So theoretically you could have a very thin steel component, or maybe even a polymer. But I don't know whether we really want to rush any more in that direction. These components, these trigger guards, just in the time that I've had these different rifles, I've taken them apart, and in some cases I don't store them assembled, I store them disassembled, and some of the plastic components sort of take on their own shape, I guess from molding, I don't know. So I have to kind of bend them and twist them to get them back in place, which isn't true of the wood stock, which is quite stable, even though everybody says don't buy wood stocks because they're not stable. But the 110 is kind of hidden behind here, and you can see how beautifully made that barrel is. There's an island for the rear sight, and there is a rear sight, and there's a front sight on a ramp, and you could pick up this 110. It's in 308. I made another video about it. Had it to the range. Exceptionally accurate rifle. I took off the scope just because it kind of encumbers filming, and it has it has all the features. I don't talk about the safety on this because it's so conventional. Bolt removal on the Savages is you pull the trigger and then push this button forward, and then the bolt comes out. Anyway, for all of you that wrote me about this Axis, I don't blame you for saying it's an exceptional rifle. It's very smooth, it's very slick, and it may be, in some ways, the highest expression of this modern way of making rifles, which, as far as I can tell, means the manufacturers are sort of headed to a point where the only thing that's left on the rifle that's conventional is the barrel, because the barrel has to be steel and it has to be rifled. The receivers, they seem to be able to keep changing and shortening and lightening, and I mean it's even possible we see a polymer receiver with the lugs of the bolt locking into the barrel, and a polymer bolt body, and maybe other components as well. But I don't know. if that's all such a great idea. And I don't know what these rifles will be worth down the road. Not that everything has to be in an investment, but it's just some thoughts for you to think about. And probably my summary is, are these all fine rifles? They are. Which one is most accurate? I have no idea, because I don't believe in this thing where every 783 is deadly accurate and every axis is deadly accurate. They're one of a kind, each rifle, which is part of the kind of fascination with rifles. So buy one and see how it shoots for you. But which is the best rifle on the table, leaps and bounds ahead of the rest, is the original 110. Everything about it is high quality, I think. People might argue about the floor plate or the trigger guard and so on and so forth. But these polymer guns, I call them polymer because of the stock's not really fair, are a different breed. And anyhow, obviously I seem to have a lot to say about this. And somebody's going to ask me which is better, the Axis or the 783. And truly I have no idea. If you're going by rigidity, the 783 has the more rigid action. I like that the 783 has a recoil lug. And whatever they're using for this Axis bolt handle, I don't know, when you look at it and you're used to more traditional methods of manufacturing materials, it just seems very cheap. But then we're talking about a rifle that is very cheap. So maybe that's just what it has to be. Between the two, I'd probably pick the Remington, but that's just me, you know, my opinion. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. And if you have comments or things that I don't know, they're usually more that I don't know than I do know, please write me. And I still have these rifles around and a few other black guns. I call these black guns. So I can take them apart again and answer those questions. And thank you very much for watching. Please join me on Patreon and push the subscribe button. That helps me a lot to bring you these videos. And thanks again. You all take care out there.